I don't know if you guys have heard, but there's a new offensive going on in Myanmar being done by different rebel groups, which they called the National Brotherhood Alliance. We'll talk about the different groups pairing together to conduct this counteroffensive, this operation in the Kachin province, but it's Operation 1027. Now, the Northern Brotherhood Alliance is made up of a few groups, made up of the Arkan Army, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, and the Tang National Liberation Army. Now, all together in the region they're fighting, and the region is in Kachin State, so this is along the border with China. You can see China up there to the northeast. You can see Bangladesh to the northwest. But this is the province, and they're conducting a big offensive in this area in order to try to push out the junta forces, the military junta, which overthrew the democratically elected government 2 years ago, and control the border regions. So that's the purpose of the offensive. If you were to balance all of the soldiers in this region that are part of the three groups conducting this Operation 1027, is around 20,000 soldiers, which is not something to, scoff at. That is a lot of soldiers for this war. When I've looked at estimates for the size of the military junta, and I've seen estimates ranging from 70,000 to like 100,000. So 20,000 soldiers, rebels in this area is not something to laugh at, not something to scoff at, especially when the junta is reportedly having to rely more and more on local militias and more on mobilized people in the defense industry, mobilized police officers in order to conduct this war, in order to continue to hold out against the rebels. So the purpose of this counteroffensive, this Operation 1027, is to control that province. And so far, with these three groups working together, they have garnered a lot of success. Now, I'm going to talk about that success in a moment, but I want to tell you guys why they're garnering success. Now, I obviously don't know all of the reason why this alliance is garnering success between these three rebel groups. And they're not the only rebel groups that are contributing to this counteroffensive. After the counteroffensive was announced, after this attack was announced, there were other groups like the Bar People's Liberation Army, the Malay, I'm really bad with the pronunciations, but the M People's Defense Forces. I know the PDF has also announced support, and the government, the government of the deposed democracy, have also announced support for this. So I think the main reason it's succeeding, outside of the tactical stuff, which I don't have the experience to speak on, and this is something that has been spoken about for the last 2 years endlessly by people on the ground, is that the different rebel groups are working together more and more and more and more. And with them working together more instead of infighting, they're able to coordinate their attacks, they're able to coordinate responses to the military junta, and they're able to attack them from different directions. And so this right here, in my mind, and I saw this was getting reported on, I believe in The Diplomat, what second? Is this the article right here? Yeah, The Diplomat, is how many people are going to treat this as a litmus test to see how powerful the junta is, because there's much speculation about whether it's more powerful, about whether it's less powerful than it purports to be. This is going to be a litmus test to see how well the military junta can actually deal with the pressure. We already know that about 1/3 to 2/5 of the country are controlled by rebels. Now, again, this is not one rebel group. These are multiple different rebel groups, whether it be the Chin Liberation Army, whether it be the PDF, the Popular Defense Forces, whether it be any of these different militias controlled by different groups. But that's a lot of territory to not be held by the central authority. In fact, I think that's the most land that has not been held by the central authority, even with all the rebellions that continue to happen and all of the different rebel groups that continue to operate for decades. The military junta is in the worst position it has probably ever been. Dorficlus, thank you so much for the primer. I appreciate it. So with that in mind, that this is going to be seen as a litmus test for these militias, for these rebel groups that can show they can work together. If they can show they can work together and they can coordinate against the government, then maybe this could be seen, and I know this is what the Diplomat said, and it might be getting a little ahead of itself, but it could be seen as a turning point. It could show that this isn't just a ragtag group of rebels in the mountains just randomly shooting around, seeing if they can get one guy there, one guy there. This is a rebellion coordinated between different ethnic groups and rebels against the government that is willing to work with each other more than they've ever been willing to work with each other. And that is why, because I've seen signs of that and I've heard of that happening, that I think this has much more chance of success than the previous rebel groups had in the previous operations before the military coup. Now, I want to give you guys an idea of how much has gone on since this operation started to commence. The operation started on October 27th, and in 3 days, they announced that they had reportedly taken approximately 57 junta military camps and stations, killed more than 100 troops, and have captured an additional 10. Now, these are just the 3 main rebel groups that are working together. On top of those 3 main rebel groups, there are other groups that are now, once they're seeing that this has success, that are throwing their weight behind the rebellion. Now, 57 junta military camps, that was in the first 3 days. More has been captured since then. If you go through these threads that are being posted online, you just see endless footage of camps and buildings being captured by the rebels. This right here is a border crossing into China, which is very valuable to control considering how much resources are sent from Myanmar into China. It's part of the reason that the Chinese government has responded to the announcement of this operation, which is around the Chinese border regions, by just calling for a cessation to hostilities. Now, China does have a lot of influence. China has not only negotiated with the central government of Myanmar, but has also negotiated with different rebel groups. They have yet to put their foot on the scale against this particular counteroffensive, against this particular fighting, but they have sent a lot of weapons to the Myanmar military junta. And you can just see, look at, like, you can just see all the different, there's so much here. So much stuff getting captured. Look at this, for example. Resistance forces say they captured Lat Feng Tung outpost near the capital after all Sitat troops fled on October 23rd. This was before the announcement of even the counteroffensive. This post is less than 20 kilometers from Sitat capital. 20 kilometers from the capital. Now, most of the fighting, most of the real action is happening in that border province with China. That's where you really need to keep an eye on. That's what you really need to concentrate on. But it also isn't restrained just to that area. As I said before, there were other rebel groups that have decided to throw their weight behind this offensive. But if they don't have soldiers in the province, how can they contribute? Well, by attacking outposts in other locations of the country, so the government has to scramble to not only send troops to this northern province, which the government is doing right now. They're sending reportedly thousands upon thousands of troops to try to respond to this. I think, here's a picture of it. This is October 27th. This is on the first day of Operation 1027. Them sending troops up there. But if they're also being attacked in other locations of the country, then they also got to redeploy troops over there. And so what we need to be watching for is not only how much ground do they pick up in this province where they border with China, we need to see what other rebel groups do in response to the situation. If they take advantage of it to take more land, take more territory from the government, if they can cause more chaos, try to cause the government to respond to them instead of responding to the main problem. You know, tie those troops down, hold them in a bulldog choke, as Ulysses S. Grant once said. We need to watch to see how the government responds and if they can deal with the problem. Because the reports that I've read seem to indicate that the government responds to this usually by just bombing villages seemingly at random with military aircraft and shelling seemingly at random at local villages before sending in soldiers and criminals and militias to then burn down villages that are associated with the rebellion, massacre everyone, My Lai style. So this will be a test to see if those methods can cut it against a coordinated offensive from multiple rebel groups at the same time, working together more than ever. I will say, though, that it is pretty funny to see a group that at the start of this war, you know, we were talking about mostly because they were 3D printing guns to fight against the rebellion. We were talking about it because, of course, of the pro-democracy element to it, but we didn't have any idea that it was going to succeed in the immediate future. We said this is going to be a long struggle. And they were printing 3D guns, getting ready for the most guerrilla of guerrilla wars. This is a PDF soldier you can see from the flag. It's Popular Defense Forces, pro-democracy militia. Made up of a lot of people who fled from the cities, who historically would not join in rebellions, but joined in the rebellion because of their pro-democracy principles. This is the opinion piece that was released 2 days before this operation, to give you an idea of how the media is shifting how it views how strong the junta is. Because before, all it was talked about is, okay, well, how can we get this hostilities to an end as quick as possible? You know, how long is it going to take for the violence to end? The shifting is, the conversation has shifted. Myanmar military unlikely to win war, but opposition needs global help to depose junta. Now, this is an opinion piece, but this is being written about in the South China Morning Post. We're not getting mainstream CNN segments on this, but it does show that the confidence in the junta is failing. The military response is not working to suppress dissent. Arresting the dissenters and protesters is only inflaming tensions more, and that the rebellion is more coordinated than ever.